I've talked about Patriot Mobile's commitment to faith, family, and freedom. But have you made the switch yet? Support your values with your cell phone without sacrificing quality or service. Worried about coverage? Don't be. Patriot Mobile uses all 3 major U.S. networks. If you have cell phone service today, you can get service with Patriot Mobile. Think switching is hard? It's not. Their 100% U.S.-based team can activate your phone within minutes. They even have a contract buyout. So go to patriotmobile.com/Kirk25 or call 972-PATRIOT today. Promo code Kirk25 for a free month of service. Pastor Greg Laurie is in the house. Pastor, you are one of the most, I'm going to say it, you don't have to say it, but you're one of the most famous evangelists in the country. You do Harvest Crusades at Angel Stadium all over the country as well. Thousands and thousands of people come to faith in Jesus Christ. You knew Charlie. You came to our events. You've been supportive. You do things the right way. You have a long history in a really thriving church in Southern California, multiple campuses. I've known you for years. I just want you to help make sense of this moment. You know, a lot of people talking about revival. We've seen revival. We've also seen opposition. The floor is yours. I mean, help us put eyes to this.
Well, I'm reminded of that first line of A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. You know, both things can happen simultaneously. And these are dark times, but they're very bright times. And there are signs of revival, and I don't say that lightly, because I was around for the last great spiritual awakening, the Jesus movement. You know, I didn't realize it at the time, Andrew, but I had a front row seat to an actual spiritual awakening, the last great awakening, and of all places, in California. And so, you know, looking back in retrospect, and we made a movie about it called Jesus Revolution, or actually John Irwin, the director, had the vision to make this film. But, and so people say, do you think we're having another Jesus revolution? I said, well, I see promising signs. But now looking at the last just few months, I would say I see more than promising signs. I see things happening that have not happened for a long time, and things that have never happened at all. Take baptisms, for instance. Back in the heyday of the Jesus movement, we would go to a little spot called Pirates Cove and baptize a lot of people. But in the last just few years, we've seen over 20,000 people baptized at that same spot. The movie had a little cause and effect. It was sort of like a case of, they say a movie or whatever, art imitates life. In this case, life is imitating art, imitating life. People said, I want to be baptized in that spot. But this is a phenomena. And of course, since Charlie was killed, and I hate to say that, but, we have to say this. And I think it's more than just saying he died. He was murdered, and we all know that. But, and I'm humbled and honored to be in the studio where he would sit in the seat right next to me and do what he did so well. But it's like rocket fuel has been poured on a pre-existing fire. And I see it intensifying. In fact, Wall Street Journal, you probably saw this article, even commented on the upsurge of Bible sales. And they directly attribute this to Charlie's death. And so, Andrew, you may remember that our son Christopher died in an automobile accident 16 years ago. Yeah. And so I think when something tragic happens to Christians like that, we try to, why? Why did God let this happen? And sometimes some Christians, well-meaning, but I think misdirected, will try to find cause and effect. Like, this happened, so this other thing will happen. I think we need to separate them, then look at them together. Charlie being killed was a horrible tragedy. The end. But despite a horrible tragedy, God is doing a mighty work. Yeah. And we could look at Stephen, which is a direct parallel. The death of Stephen was a tragedy. And to the point we even read that godly men mourned over him. So it was a tragedy for the church. Yet the gospel went out with greater power after the death of Stephen, because the church finally got the memo. Oh yeah, we're not supposed to hang around in Jerusalem in a holy huddle. We're supposed to spread across the world and preach the gospel. And that's what happened after Stephen's death. So we can see a horrible tragedy that God is using. Not long before Charlie was killed, he was asked, what is your favorite Bible passage? And you remember it's Romans 8:28. God can cause all things to work together for good to those that love God. And as Joseph said to his brothers who betrayed him, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So we see God working despite the tragedy. And I like to make that distinction, despite the tragedy. And I'm thinking, if I'm Charlie in heaven, I would rejoice knowing that this was happening after I was called home to glory. And so I think that's probably the greatest tribute that this is a man that lived a godly life, a life of integrity, a life of passion, a life of purpose. And a lot of people who never even heard his name before are now going, who is this guy? And what did he actually believe? And they're not believing the caricature of Charlie presented by people that hate him and hate what he stands for. But they're checking out his own videos and seeing he was actually very civil, very patient. People would insult him to his face, and he would just listen, and then he would patiently respond. And, so they're seeing what this guy really stood for. And so I think that we are seeing revival-like things happen right now. And there's no question that Charlie's death has had an effect on this.
That was beautifully said. I think you summed up so much of what I'm seeing, what I'm noticing. But I'm curious, Lucas, like, you are the tip of the spear when it comes to TPUSA faith and building out, the church network, and we've seen this tremendous growth. I think we went last data point I saw, and it's probably bigger than that now, but it was, we had 4,000 churches in our network. Now we have
over 8,000.
Yeah. Wow. So tell us what you're seeing on that front.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I will say, as because I am a pastor myself, I still have a church in Indiana, and then also head up the faith department here. And that was something that Charlie and I, as we were kind of designing my role, felt like if I'm going to call on the nation's pastors, it's important to do so, as a pastor. And my own church has doubled in size during this time period. Wow. And I've heard that same report from churches throughout our network. I mean, in the last 60 days, countless text messages from pastors saying, we're up 10%, we're up 15%, we're up 30%, we're up 40%, some churches that doubled. And it's been absolutely remarkable to see. And it's not, you can't fabricate revival like this.
No.
You can't throw out advertising dollars and get just change hearts for people to start buying Bibles and showing up to church and everything else. And there was the catalyst was the martyrdom of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
And when Charlie lost his life, and the instantaneous reaction, obviously grief, obviously horror, obvious pain, but the immediate aftermath was, I need Jesus. And
Yes.
people just started showing up to church. I mean, we had a guy who had never been to church in his entire life show up.
Yeah.
And, I think the thing that this also does, and we had talked about this a little bit, is it drew a line in the sand for pastors.
Yeah.
If your pastor was silent during COVID, silent during all the trans stuff in the schools, now silent during the martyrdom of Charlie Kirk, you talked about that those righteous men, grieved Stephen's death.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of clergy that did not even talk about this.
Yeah.
And just as a pastor, how horrified I was to see, other quote unquote men of the cloth not know how to navigate that moment and to miss the opportunity for revival in this nation.
Well, and this is why I'm so glad to have you on, Greg, because, I was talking with a pastor recently who said that he thought that I can't remember if he said there was judgment on big evangelicalism, or that the revival was going to bypass the pulpits this time. And you're one of those pastors that I would not include in that prescription. I think you have been faithful. You have proclaimed the gospel. You have been steady and consistent. And so I guess my question out of that thought is, what does the church need to do to capture this moment, this energy? Because I do think there is a potential where, people were going to Charlie on social media. They weren't necessarily, even before, in life, we saw that church attendance was starting to click up, that Bible sales were clicking up. After years and years of decline, we saw that balance out. So what is your call to pastors that find themselves in a position to harness this energy?
Well, the problem, Andrew, is sometimes pastors are answering questions people are not asking, and they're not answering the questions that are being asked. This is a moment in time, and we need to seize the moment. And like you said, Lucas, so many people coming to church, and specifically young people. And this is what I see as a parallel between this moment and the Jesus movement. The Jesus movement was a youth revival. And I see young people coming back. Of course, we are already seeing this trend. Charlie even talked about it. Gen Z kids coming back to church, and specifically Gen Z boys.
Yeah.
And that is, I've never heard of that before. Because usually, let's be honest, women lead the way in spiritual things. But to see young men starting to come, and I think of voices like Charlie's and others that have, Jordan Peterson, other voices of encouragement to embrace their masculinity, biblical masculinity, but I think even more to be men of God. And so I think this is a moment in time. I don't think we can be neutral. There's the culture has encroached on the church now. Now they're coming into our world, and we saw it with COVID and the shutdowns. We certainly saw it in California. Some churches shutting down, staying closed for months on end, and what a mistake that was. And then, but also, pushing trans issues, and we need to speak out for these things. I don't think we can say anymore to our congregants, well, just vote your conscience. No. They need to vote biblically. And as pastors, we have a responsibility to educate them biblically. What does the Bible say about these things, and offer theology without apology? So, even in the Democratic Party, they're decrying the extremism in it. And that is what seems to be influencing the party more and more right now, as we've seen in the election in New York for mayor and other areas. And so, okay, fine. But we need to be overt and out front and direct in what we believe. And if our founding fathers had cowered, we wouldn't have an America to celebrate this freedom in today like we have right now. So this is a moment you got to stand up, be counted. I want to encourage my fellow pastors to do that. But here's the most important thing: preach the gospel. I interviewed Frank Turk the other day for my podcast, and Charlie said to him, what we do politically is it's small potatoes compared to the gospel. And one of the last things Charlie talked about before he was killed was Jesus. And he talked about that openly, because that's why I didn't think it was fair to describe him a political activist. I mean, in a way, he was that, of course. But I saw him as a Christian leader that influenced everything that he did, including politics, as it should. But I think that we need to preach the gospel boldly and call people to Christ. I'm going to go to UVU on November 16th, and we're going to preach the gospel on that campus and call them to Christ.